Good morning, all. If we could get started, because I know you all have probably much more important or at least much more enjoyable things to do on a Saturday morning, but thank you all for coming. We thought that this would be the best day to do this sort of thing, and we thought doing it twice on a Saturday would be the best way to achieve it too. Don't know how many people we'll get throughout the course of the day, but this is the first of the next 12 months of a process that we began about a year ago, which you'll hear referred to over and over again as an MSBA process, stands for Massachusetts School Building Authority. The purpose of which is to present to the MSBA a project that we ask them to fund a substantial portion of. So, and over the course of the next year, we're going to have several of these forums where we will present another stage of things. This is a stage where you won't get many answers if you came in with questions about, where it's going to go, what it's going to look like, and that sort of thing. So this is introductory. We're actually looking for input about what you would like to see in a school. And we will again, but it will be another stage where we'll know more about the project as it starts to take shape. Probably the next forum, I would think, is in the fall. And just by way of introduction that I probably should have started with, my name is TJ Recupero. I'm on the Board of Selectmen, and I have the pleasure of serving as the chairman of the Stoughton High School School Building Committee. A committee that's comprised of, I think it's 11 people, who I have to tell you are fantastic to work with. It's one of the best committees I've ever been in town because everybody's intelligent. Everybody goes into these meetings with an action plan in the back of their head, and we get business done and we get out. And things over the course, although you wouldn't know it sitting at home unless you watched our meetings, that we've been making progress, but we have. We're in a process that actually has different stages and benchmarks that we need to meet. The last one that we did was appointing an architect that you'll hear about in a few minutes. But for present purposes, I just wanted to introduce you all to the general theme of today, and also to tell you a little bit about the committee. The committee is comprised of, as I said, 11 people who are filling slots that MSBA, under its regulations, requires to be represented on the committee. You'll see, for example, that myself as chair, one of the requirements is that one of the members of the Board of Selectmen be on it. The town manager, the superintendent of schools, the principal, the director of maintenance for the schools, someone who has building and construction authority in town. We do have community members. Our community members all have different qualifications that are specific to a project like this. Roberta Harback, for example, she worked on Southeastern Regional School on their school building committee. Michael Conley, for example, he's a Stoughton resident, but he also happens to be Mansfield High School principal. So we meet once a month. You may have seen our meetings on SMAC. We also have working group meetings every other week where outside of the committee meetings, we hone down on nuts and bolts things and bring it back to the committee for action. And over the course of the next month, the committee will be shaping up. We're in a feasibility study period where we'll be shaping up a project, trying to meet as many objective criteria on a project of a new high school project, whether it be a renovation, a new high school, a combination of the two, so that we can present it to MSBA, ask them if they'll fund a significant portion of it, which one of the speakers behind me can tell you a little bit more about. And then we'll bring it to the town. We'll go first to town meeting, where we, as I said, the committee does good work, and we do it on a pretty tight schedule, and we go in, we get stuff done, so we can tell you pretty much down to the day where we're going to have a vote from town meeting next year. We can tell you down to the day where we'll have a vote, an election, special election for the purpose of a debt exclusion if that's necessary, so, which it likely will be. So, and in that, I don't want to take too much of your morning, so I do want to pass off, and the parties that will follow me are, we have, one of the first steps was we had to appoint an owner's project manager. We went through a process of interviewing, I think it was 14 then pared down to 4. We interviewed them. You might have seen that on SMAC. And we came up with Compass Project Management to do our project. They have experience in rebuilding and building new high schools around the Commonwealth. I think Norwood was one of the projects, and Marshfield was another one, if any of you are familiar with those. And Dom Tiberi, who's with us here today, I'll pass off to him. But we also just appointed an architect, DRA, Drummey Rosane and Anderson. DRA is actually easier. But and Carl Franchetti is here, and he will speak. And then we're going to break down into working group sessions where we'll ask for your input, and there will be people there to answer questions and actually try to find out what we as a community want for a high school. At that, I don't want to, again, take too much of your mornings. I do want to pass it off to Dom Tiberi. If I missed anything, someone can nudge me, and I'll pick it up later. Thanks very much. Dom?
Thank you, TJ. Can everybody see me? The reason they picked us is because I'm so tall and I'll be on the job site, so you'll know where I am at all times. First of all, congratulations. This is, I saw an article that said from the 1920s that had the original Stoughton High School. So we're a century from that original Stoughton High School, or that was probably previously Stoughton High School. So I wanted to explain that as an owner's project manager really quickly, my job is the liaison, or the company's job. We're the liaison for the project. And it's not just the liaison with the town administration and the school district and the architect and the general contractor, but it's also with the Mass School Building Authority, who is our partners in this process. The other thing, too, is I'm also the liaison to the neighbors, the community members, the students here, the teachers, and their administration. So my job is really to try to conduct and try to get the best unbiased, process-driven project that we can possibly get for Stoughton, because this project will be, and it is, one of your major projects in the upcoming years in this town of Stoughton. This project, we call it a 50-year building. I always say it's a 100-year building because you have a building that's right behind me that's 100 years old and you're still using it, so it is that way. I was going to say, do I go to the next slide, Tom? Just showing what we have here is, you know, the makeup of the project team. And as I said, this is the basis of the project team, but we also have inputs from all other people here. So we have the school building committee that TJ had talked about. We have the town of Stoughton. And the important partner is the MSBA, because their part of this is the reimbursement that's important for all of us here. The one thing I want to say about the MSBA would... A little tighter? Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry about that. I'm not used to this. Sorry about that. The one thing I want to say about the MSBA is they have criteria and guidelines that we have to follow. And we're right now in the process of doing that first stage milestone. And DRA will come about with a more elaborate program showing us what we're doing right now, and I'll talk about it briefly. And as TJ said, the first part of it, really back in 2012, I think, was when this whole thing kind of started, although I'm sure there was discussions prior to that. Eventually, you did hire the OPM this past December, and then we brought in DRA, who is the architectural firm, and now things are starting to move forward. The important thing to remember, though, is that this is a collaborative method and a process-driven. So, as I said, the MSBA requires us to do things with milestones and criteria, and these are the milestones that are coming up for the upcoming year. It's a preliminary design program, which I'll explain a little bit more, and this is what we're going through right now, and DRA will elaborate. And then we do preferred schematics. We'll explain that further. And then we go to the schematic design. And as TJ said, eventually we'll have that preferred solution. This is the building we're going to go forward with, whether it's an ad reno or a new building on this site, on a possible other site. These are things that we all have to do for the state to make sure that we cover ourselves in an unbiased way going forward. So the process right now in preliminary design is existing conditions. So we've done a bit of review. You'll see a site map here that has, and what we did is we look at things from a broad scope. We have like an opening. We say, okay, what are the possible sites throughout the town of Stoughton? We kind of narrow that down to what makes the most sense, and some of the criteria that we look at is traffic plans. We look at the busing that you bring the students in. We look at the location. We look at the size of the property. You probably need between 25, and that's tight, or 30 acres of land for a standalone, sorry again, I'm doing that, a standalone high school. We then go through existing conditions of the facilities. We then look at the educational program. These are some of the milestones we have to hit to present to the MSBA to go forward to the next step. And then we look at also the alternates. It's important to know that we are right now in the process of doing all that. Carl's team has already started meeting with the school administration, with the departments to clarify the needs of this school. And also, at the end of this process, what we will come up with is we'll come up with a couple of locations, possible places for a school to go to, possible processes in this particular site also. But not only that, we'll also have an understanding of the square footage that's required for this educational plan. We'll understand the flow of the students, the massing of where the educational program works within the building, and tell me when I'm wrong, Carl, you'll correct me next. But they also, as I said earlier, the utilities that have to come into this particular site, the traffic patterns, anything that requires, and actually the cultural norm of this town. This is the center in most communities of a lot of the community activities. So it's important that we situate it properly, that we have the ability to have the community reach that area, and that actually, make this the most vibrant part of your community while meeting the educational program of the community as well. I'm just going to go through real quick, and then Carl and his team are going to talk about some of the next steps. So at the end of September, we'll get this preliminary design program, PDP. We'll have to present it to the Mass School Building Authority as part of our team. Then going from there, we'll be kind of directed, and we'll go through a preferred schematic report. And that'll include the educational plan. That'll include all these evaluations of the, I apologize. That will include all the evaluations of the alternatives, and as it says here, we will drill down to that preferred option. And that's when and we'll have another community meeting for this. We'll explain all this. This community meeting, we're trying to get that input. What works here, what doesn't work here, what would you like to see in the future, et cetera. Because we're going to remember, we're building for the future, and the future is uncertain with the way educational plans are. Our kids are learning things now that, changes within 2 years. So we're trying to make this as flexible a teaching environment as possible. And then the schematic design. That's when we really get pencil to paper, as like they used to say years ago in the architecturals. We're going to look at this project in scope, budget, and schedule. And that's where we'll actually have hard numbers. We'll actually have some schematic diagrams like you see here. These are not what we're looking at. These are examples of things that we're going to be able to do in the future. And eventually we'll have that budget, we'll have that presentation, and as TJ said, there'll be a time for the community to vote on that. So I'm going to hand it over to Carl from DRA, our architect. Thank you very much, and sorry.
Thanks, Tom. That was a good job. I can reduce my time here, but after that schematic design is complete is when we can submit this to the MSBA and have the town meeting next spring, 12 months from now. But the important point here, and I can show you our more detailed work plan, which has those same steps, but the thing we want to mention here is it is sort of a systematic process here that we don't want to get ahead of ourselves. We don't want to start designing the building until we know what the program is. So we'll spend a lot of time right now, this month and this summer, working with the school department, the administration, the faculty, to develop that educational plan. So whether it's a renovation or addition, we're going to spend time now deciding what needs to get built before any design is done. Then we're going to also look at alternatives, as Dom mentioned, that we need to understand, is a renovation addition, the best option, new construction on this site or new construction on another site? We're going to examine each of those. It's not just the prudent thing to do, it's a required thing to do in order to participate in the MSBA process. And then once we've identified that preferred alternative and we've narrowed it down to one way to go, is when we start developing more detail and more accurate cost estimates, budget and schedule estimates as well. So that's following next winter and early spring, so that we can get this submitted in the spring and to your town meeting next May or June. We also want to point out these asterisks along the way are these kind of forums. So there will be more of these. Today is the first one. There'll be several others as we move through the process. We just want to identify some of the key issues here, probably not unusual to you or to others, that as I said, before we design anything, we want to understand what's the program. How does Stoughton want to teach and learn? And how large should the building be? What kind of spaces should it have? And so on. That's a very important first step. Then once we have that, we can start trying to apply it either to a new building or to an addition renovation. And obviously, with an existing building, for those of you who want to stick around afterwards and go on tours, you'll see there are some significant challenges in this building to get a new educational program to fit into this existing envelope. We're going to look at existing sites. That's obviously important. As Don mentioned, a high school is one of the most, if not the most important public building in most communities. And siting it properly is a very important first step. We know a lot of people, yourselves included, want to be involved in this, so community outreach is going to be, and already has started to be, a very essential part of this process. The building committee is great, and they've got great support in terms of cable TV, newspapers, websites. We'll share some of that with you. So there's excellent ways to stay informed about the project. So one of the first steps we're going to attack is the existing conditions analysis, looking at this building both from a facilities point of view, in other words, just kind of the nuts and bolts of the building. Does it keep the rain out? Does it keep the heat in? Is it the surfaces, the wear and tear, the systems, all those kinds of things. From a physical point of view, we're going to analyze. But then there's also the programmatic analysis of the existing buildings. Does it have adequate spaces? Are they being used appropriately, or are we using closets, to teach special ed? Or are the spaces organized in the right kind of configuration? So that's what the adjacencies are about. Are the spaces that want to be near each other, are they located near each other currently? So we'll analyze the existing building for those two aspects. And just to talk about this, I love this photograph here. In 1920, this is what the high school looked like here in Stoughton. And today, obviously, there have been a few additions to that. You can see the original 1920s building. Then in the 50s, one wing was added. Later in the 50s, another wing and the gym was added. And then in the late 60s, the space we're in right now was added to sort of complete the complex. But frankly, not much has been done in the last 50 years almost here. Other than trying to keep up the existing building, no significant renovations or additions. Just quickly, as I said, there'll be opportunity for tours at the end of the sessions today, and you can see firsthand the existing building. The envelope of the building has some issues. The brick. There are water penetration issues. There's some roofs that are at the end of their life. The windows in many places need attention. accessibility issues through the building, even some minor structural issues now. If you can see some of the concrete and reinforcing steel is starting to show through. And then inside there are spaces like the science labs that are woefully small for current standards. The staff does a great job making use of those spaces, but they don't meet today's standards. And then some of the systems behind the scenes, the mechanical, electrical systems, are also in need of attention. As Don mentioned, in 1920, this was the proposal. This isn't exactly what got built, but they did think of it as the latest word in architecture then. We've come a long way now. We sort of skipped a whole century. We're into the 21st century, as opposed to the 19th century, I think, standards that were in place at the time. And some of the educational programming strategies that we're going to investigate with the superintendent and administration involve new ways of teaching and learning. And we won't go through all the details here, but just to let you know, we've got a dedicated educational programmer, both within our office at DRA, but also an independent consultant, Dr. Frank Locker, who actually is an international educational consultant. So he brings a great breadth of experience as to what's going on out there in other high schools, and we'll share some of that. We call the strategy visioning, where we gather together, and we'll have future sessions not only with the administration and staff, but with some other interested parties too, to develop a vision for what Stoughton High School should be. And again, this is regardless of whether it's a renovation addition or new construction. We want to develop a vision educationally. And then that vision gets translated into a space summary where we list each and every space that needs to be in the building. How many square feet, how many classrooms, and so on. How large is the gym, how large is the auditorium, those kinds of. And then the third major step is translating that into conceptual plans. You might see some around the room that are diagrammatic kinds of plans. Some architects call them bubble diagrams because often the spaces are represented as circles, but it starts to be a physical representation of the space summary. And some of the key terminologies, those of you who follow education might have seen some of this before, but you know, kids are learning in different ways now. And also educators are recognizing that children learn differently. Not everyone learns the same way. And sometimes the facilities have to support that. Not just the teachers and their methods and the curriculum, but the spaces too have to support, you know, some kids who learn better with their hands and project-based learning, others who do enjoy lectures and absorb information that way, others who learn best by coaching others and actually participating in more collaborative fashion and so forth. So the spaces in the school, you'll see nowadays that high schools in particular are no longer corridors with classrooms on either side of them. Typically, there are more variety of spaces in schools, and this is primarily why. And also feedback from employers that say, you know, the graduates that, or whether they go on to college or go into the workforce, they need different skills than a generation ago. They need to know how to communicate. They need to know how to work together collaboratively. They need to be able to think critically. So those are some of the so-called 21st century skills that high schools are now focusing on. And just a couple other things. This affects sort of the relationship between teacher and student. Just to give you one example, there's a strategy called the flipped classroom, where, you know, in the old days, let's call it, myself, others, in the classroom you got lectured, and at home you did homework on your own. Well, now kids can get lecture at home by watching videos on their computer. They can get the lecture content of the curriculum at home, and when they're in class is a time to do homework, to do problems, and to get assistance from the teacher or from other students even. So that's where the idea of flipping it comes around. They do homework in the classroom, they do lecture, so to speak, at home. And there's ideas like that change the relationship between teacher and student. One of the other, it affects schedules sometimes too. the traditional, 45 or 50-minute class might not be the best way to support the new vision of education. There might need to be longer blocks or different schedules. We'll look at that as well in the educational plan. And the way the school is organized. This is sort of more traditional. There are departments, math, English, social studies. But nowadays, sometimes schools are organized differently. There might be academies, freshman academy maybe, or there might be subject areas that go across subjects, curriculum areas, so that not all the math classrooms are together, and maybe not even all the science classrooms are together. So some of those ideas will be investigated as part of this. So you can see these kinds of thoughts and all affect whatever we choose to build, whether it's going to be to renovate this building or to build new on this site or another site. And as was mentioned, we've already started this process. That's Dr. Locker there, Julie Miller, the high school principal, and a teacher and our educational programmer getting together at these kinds of sessions. We've gone through and met with most every department already as the first step in this process. We're going to continue to do that. These are some of the diagrams that will come out of that at the end of educational programming. They're very, in a way, simplistic, but they show the key relationships sometimes between the different parts of the school. And then in looking at sites, as was mentioned, we're going to analyze this site, which you'll see some diagrams around the room, to test, whether a new school can fit on this site, how it would fit, what the implications are with that, and likewise, how an addition renovation would work. We want to mention that we are sort of seriously looking at that, although we have no preconceptions. We know there are challenges with an addition renovation. Just as an example, in Needham, so that you understand, an addition renovation could involve some demolition, maybe some significant amount of demolition. So only a portion of the existing building was saved. Everything in red was demolished. The historic portion of the building was retained, and new construction added to it. So that's a possibility as well. And sometimes even a very small move of, in this case, this is Southeastern Regional, where we built a new gymnasium, freed up the old gymnasium space to become a library, the old library space to become an extension of the cafeteria. So those things are possible with an addition renovation. We also want to talk about, what the implications are when we consider new construction. Here's a project where the existing high school remained in operation here, and a new school was built very close to it, but in its entirety separate from the existing building. So this is a common strategy of trying to keep the existing high school in operation in its totality while a new school is built immediately adjacent to it. That's certainly one of the strategies we would investigate here. And sometimes we even need to do a little demolition of the existing school in order to fit a new school in. So this was a project that ended up looking like that once the old school was demolished. But again, the strategy is a new construction can happen fairly close to an existing school with the proper safeguards of separation and trying to minimize distraction. It's a challenge, but it can be done, and we'll be studying that kind of option here. And as was mentioned, we are going to study other sites. We're already in the process of identifying properties in town that might be candidates. We have no conclusions as yet. That's going to go on in the next few months here before we get to real candidates. But we have identified, existing school sites, existing town-owned properties, where we're looking at those characteristics now. And we have to think about, whether it's the existing building or whether it's a new site. These are some of the criteria. And we're looking for more from your aspect as to, the criteria for locating a high school. What's important to you all here in Stoughton. And then the way we analyze it is with a tool like this. It's a matrix where we would list all those criteria in one column, and then however many options. In this case, there are 4 columns there, so there were 4 options being considered. This is another project, but just to show you. And then we would kind of rank those sites. So we try to do it unemotionally and somewhat objectively. Not all criteria have the same value or weight necessarily, but it does help, you know, come to consensus on whether and which option is the best. So as we said, I think the town's put together the right team here. We're going through a very well-regimented process, and we've got a lot of experience on our team to bring to this. Let me explain what we do now, because we're going to put you to work as well. So for the next 30 to 40 minutes, what we want to do is break up into smaller sections. We've arranged the tables here so that there are at least 4 breakout groups, as we call them, so that you can get out of your seat, reassemble, maybe get refreshment, and talk about things that are important to you. And we'll have people at each table who act as facilitators, but really we're there to listen and to record. This session is really about input. We don't have a lot of answers as yet. We're just getting started in the process. And what we suggest as possible topics, let me go through this. And this is the way many of these forums will be run as we go through. The photograph is an example of one where, you know, there was a pretty good turnout there. Some information is given out at the beginning, like we're doing now, but then we break up into smaller sessions. We invite students as well, and in certain cases, students have a table of their own, where people feel more comfortable talking in smaller groups. And the topics that we'd suggest today, but you can really talk about anything that's on your mind, but site considerations, meaning if you want to focus on that, we'll assemble over at this table here, talking about the existing building, what's good and bad about it, what the challenges are there, we'll assemble in that corner. Those who want to talk about the educational programming and some of those thoughts and ideas, and we'll gather it in this corner over here. And if there's another group, probably looking at the size here, maybe those 3 groups is enough, but if there's another topic that people really want to talk about, we can handle a 4th group too. We'll spend about, as I say, 30 to 40 minutes in those groups. Then we'll come back. If you want to move from table to table, you're free to do that. Oftentimes, people will stay at one table, but we'll come back at the end and just quickly recap. So if you were sitting over here and you want to know what those folks were talking about, we'll report on that. And we'll also report, as I say, on what questions or issues need to be followed up on. That's really an important part of what we're here. So we want to hear what's important to you. We'll record that. We won't lose it. We'll carry it forward into the next phase and get back to with answers as we build on this. So with that, I wanted to leave this slide up here too. For those who want to keep in touch with the project, you can see there's several ways to do so here. The town has been great in making information available, making this process very transparent. So you can follow up with this as well. So with that, I ask you to get up. You can get some refreshments, but then reassemble it at one of the 3 tables here, and we'll carry on. We're just going to spend a couple minutes here. There's 2 other things on the agenda. One, to recap what sort of went on at each session, so that those who were in one corner of the room could find out what good things were being said in the other corner. And then for those who want to stick around, there'll be opportunities to tour the existing building too, led by very informed people who can point out, you know, what's going on here. So, and for those who want to go on the tours after this, you can assemble back in that corner there. So I'll start with our group. Let me move this, sorry. We were talking about the existing conditions, the existing building and existing site over in that corner there. We start off by sort of listing what are the positive things, what are the negative things about the existing building, and quickly the negative things list was longer than the positive things list. And it became kind of obvious that if we were going to renovate this building, that the word renovation may not even be appropriate because of the amount of work that would be needed to sort of take out the existing systems, take out a lot of walls probably, in order to bring the building up to 21st century standards. So it was anticipated that there'd be a lot of work and therefore a lot of money to renovate the existing building. There weren't all that many positive things to save about it. Some of the negative things, there are a lot of systems and the build materials are old and at the end of their life. The auditorium was felt to be small, that the lights and the sounds were out of date. The gym is small. There are some roof leaks, some things we've heard before. And then when we started talking about the existing building and what it could be, or the existing site and what it could be, there were issues about it should be more community friendly and really be the hub of community activities for whatever that means in terms of parking, access, configuration, those kinds of things. Let me see, there was another page. The current layout of the building is confusing and awkward, inefficient to get around, and also the parking and drop-off is not well configured either. There's the large assembly spaces are not supported by appropriate parking areas, and the drop-off areas are not safe or convenient. Those are, I think, the major ones we talked about. Then we started getting into the wish list of what the new building could have, and it included such things as indoor track and hockey rink. So we'll keep that in mind. It may be a little beyond the scope of the project, but we understand the needs for that in the community. So I think that was our group. Scott?
Hi, I'm Scott Wooden with DRA Architects. I will be the project manager on the project. And our group talked about educational programming, the educational program. And I just want to remind everyone too, there is a board right behind that column right there that has some Post-its in front of it that says at the top, what is the one thing that you'd like to see in the new Stoughton High School? And we really would like to get some feedback on that. And you can be silly about it, but we'd like to also get some real ideas about what are really the goals. Right now is the great time of the project where we haven't really started to dig into the budget and all of the code requirements and things like that. So the sky's the limit. We want to dream big, we want to see what we can capitalize on, how much we can get into the project in the end to be able to accommodate the educational program. So our group talked about, we had a really exciting discussion about a lot of the 21st century learning initiatives and what sort of transformations are happening within the classroom to accommodate education as it is today. It's not what we had in the 1960s of just having a typical classroom with 25 tablet armchairs facing a chalkboard. It's much more, this is the old model, it's much more flexible. And it's about flexibility within the classroom, but also that the boundaries of the classroom are breaking down, and we're using migration into other spaces, migration into the outdoors, outdoor learning spaces, into the corridor, and flexible breakout spaces within the classroom, strong connections to media centers, satellite media resources, satellite maker spaces, satellite breakout areas, so that all throughout the school you don't have to go a mile to get to the media center or a mile to go to an area where you can do small group activities. They're all interspersed or dispersed throughout the whole floor plan of the school. We talked about how educational displays and how graphics throughout the school can help to accommodate learning opportunities throughout the facility. This was actually a sketch that we had prepared for our interview with the city and with the MSBA about just how all of the spaces, the corridors, can have opportunities where learning can happen throughout the day. It doesn't all have to happen within the classroom. The whole day and coming and going between the different educational spaces should all represent an opportunity for learning, an opportunity for discourse, an opportunity for dialogue. So we talked about how pride of place, how a new building and a new environment can energize the pride of the community within that facility and taking care of that. hands-on learning, project-based learning, how different aptitudes of different children have to be served. As we have a more and more diverse community of students, we have to have more and more diverse tools within the classroom, within our educational delivery, to be able to accommodate all of those different learning modalities. Semi-vocational spaces, maker spaces. Engineering, right now, it's subrogated to the basement. We want to elevate that and make that more part of the curriculum, part of all of the learning environments throughout the school. Open environments within the school. Somebody talked about how that was more like the workspaces that we're going into. So in preparing to go into those workspaces, having the school environment simulate those more closely is meaningful and helpful. We talked about cows. Does anybody know what cows are? Computers on wheels. Whether we have dedicated. Joel got very nervous about us putting cows in the school, but they're computers on wheels. They're the carts. So do you have dedicated computer labs where a whole class goes to the computer lab, or do you have many of the carts that can be brought in and made to make any of the classrooms into virtual computer labs? Common planning spaces for the teachers, and we also talked about just the importance of establishing the relationships very early on in the project as to what spaces need to go next to what spaces. There's lots more interdisciplinary learning between different communities, different educational communities within the building. And we have to establish what are those important connections for Stoughton before we start the planning process. Because in some regards, a lot of the proximities might be unique to Stoughton because of the way that different groups work together within the curriculum and deliver the educational. An example would be if there was a project between how the art or the engineering programs can be integrated into the science and the mathematic curriculums. We want to be able to understand those proximities early on so that we can establish those relationships in the floor plan when we start to develop the architecture. So those are some of the topics that we talked about during the educational program discussion. And please, once again, please put a post-it on that board and tell us what you'd like to see in the new Stoughton High School. Doug Morris, the landscape architect for the project, is going to talk a little bit about the site focus group discussion. Doug.
Again, Doug Morris.
Talking to the mic.
Is this working?
Yes. Only if you hold it close.
Doug Morris, we're with Warner Larson, with the landscape architects for the project. And our study today was focusing on the site, and I didn't get as much into depth as some Carl and Scott has. But anyways, the first issue that came up was really busing. Just a central location for buses and the proximity in the center of the town for just as it relates to traffic as well. So busing was a concern. Location, again, it sort of went back to the central location of the school as it relates to the town. If it would be easy for kids to go out, get something to eat, come back to school, this would be central location is important. Community use, there was some discussion about utilizing the building for the community as well as using the fields for the community. And synthetic turf field came up as part of that discussion. Just a better use of athletics that you can do. It's more versatile and it provides more use. And then the final one was utility infrastructure, just some of the sites that we're looking at. Some have all the infrastructure, some don't. So that was pretty much our discussion. It spun off into a lot of different directions, but basically, it was those 5 things. So,
All right, thanks, Doug. And again, thank everyone for participating today. As Scott mentioned, you can participate on your way out if you want on that board and give us your thought as to, you know, the one thing you'd like to see in a new Stoughton High School. Those who would like to tour, as we said, can assemble back in that corner there, and there'll be a couple small groups that can go around the building and get a feel for the existing. So once again, keep an eye out on these websites for project information, and we'll look forward to doing this again. The next one's scheduled for September in this process. So thanks very much.
And we're going to stick around if there's any other
Oh, yes,
questions.
I'm sorry, yeah. For those who want further discussion, we're just trying to keep to the time. We said we'd get you out of here at 10:30, so we want to be respectful of that. But we'll stay around if any of you want to chat further. Thanks.